Why you feel empty after everything feels good. We all chase good feelings. We all assume that more good feelings will make us feel better. It doesn't work like that. The more pleasure we consume, the less we feel. The more we scroll, the emptier we get. The more we eat, drink, click, watch, the further the satisfaction we're chasing seems to drift away. We blame ourselves. We assume something is wrong with us, personally. It isn't personal, it's a mechanic. Before we go any further, hear this. If your life is full of small pleasures and you still feel quietly empty, the issue is not what you think. You don't have a happiness problem, you have a balance problem. Inside your brain right now there is a seesaw. On one side is pleasure, on the other side is pain. Your brain is wired to keep this seesaw level. So every time you tilt it toward pleasure, by eating, scrolling, drinking, watching, clicking, the brain immediately, automatically pushes back from the pain side to restore balance. The pleasure ends. The pushback keeps going. And you are left a few minutes later, slightly worse off than before you started. This is not motivation, this is mechanics. And by the end of this video, you'll either start seeing the seesaw at work, or you'll know exactly why you didn't. Most people think the path to feeling better is to feel good more often. It isn't. The mechanic mapped by Dr. Anna Lembke, head of the Stanford Addiction Medicine Clinic in her book Dopamine Nation, says the opposite. The brain has a hardwired pleasure-pain balance. Every dose of pleasure produces an equal and opposite dose of pain on the other side. You don't get to keep the high without paying the low. And in a world engineered to deliver more pleasure faster than at any point in human history, almost everyone is now living in the low. It worked when humans foraged for food. It works in modern Silicon Valley. It will work in 100 years. Because the seesaw is not a cultural pattern. It is the architecture of the dopamine system itself. And the system has one rule. The mechanic is this. Pleasure and pain share the same balance. Every time you consume a pleasure, the brain releases dopamine. The seesaw tips toward pleasure. Almost immediately, the brain releases its counter-response, a downward push toward pain, to restore equilibrium. The downward push is slightly larger than necessary, and it lasts longer than the pleasure did. This is called the opponent process. After the fact, you're not back at neutral, you are slightly below it. And to feel normal again, you reach for the next dose. That's it. That's the entire mechanic. No willpower failure. No moral failure. Just a seesaw doing exactly what evolution built it to do, in an environment evolution never anticipated. It sounds too simple to matter. That's exactly why almost no one understands what's happening to them. Let me show you what's actually happening underneath. Because once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Number 1, the deficit state. Watch what happens after a pleasure session. You finish the meal, you close the app, you finish the show, you put down the drink, and in the minutes after you don't feel neutral. You feel slightly worse than you did before you started, slightly more restless, slightly more empty, slightly more in need of something else. That feeling has a name. Lembke calls it the dopamine deficit state. When the seesaw tips toward pleasure, the brain compensates by tipping it toward pain. The pain side stays tipped longer than the pleasure side did. So after every pleasure session, you are sitting in the pain phase even though nothing painful happened. You are not depressed. You are not broken. You are biologically below baseline, and the baseline doesn't return for a while. The deficit state is what most people experience as the urge to do it again. The brain registers the low and looks for the fastest way back to normal. The fastest way is another hit of the same pleasure. So you scroll again, eat again, drink again. And each new hit produces a slightly smaller pleasure and a slightly bigger after pain. The seesaw stays tilted, more and more, toward the pain side. This is the mechanic underneath almost every modern compulsion. People are not chasing pleasure. They are running from a deficit state caused by the previous pleasure. The first hit was for fun. Every hit after that is to escape the consequences of the first. You don't feel empty in spite of all the small pleasures. You feel empty because of them. Number 2, the tolerance trap. Here is the part of the research that almost no one wants to hear. The seesaw is adaptive. The more you push it toward pleasure, the harder the brain pushes back to restore balance, and over time, the resting state of the seesaw shifts. The new neutral is below the old neutral. The pleasure that used to feel like a 5 now feels like a 2. The same hit no longer produces the same lift. To get back to the old feeling, you need a bigger dose, more often. Lembke describes this clearly. The brain's homeostatic response is not a moral judgment, it's pure regulation. The system is built to resist sustained tilts in either direction. So the more pleasure you consume, the more the resting baseline drops, and the more pleasure you need to feel anything at all. This is tolerance. It is the same mechanism that turns a glass of wine on Friday into 3 glasses every night. It is the same mechanism that turns 30 minutes of scrolling into 3 hours with no extra satisfaction. It is the same mechanism behind every compulsive pattern in modern life. The mechanism is not the substance. The mechanism is the seesaw. The smarter and more capable you are, the better you usually are at hiding this from yourself, because you can produce sophisticated reasons for each escalation. The wine pairs with dinner. The scrolling is research. The food is a treat after a hard day. The reasons are real. They are also the same reasons everyone else gives, in every culture, in every century, when the seesaw shifts under them. You don't have a high tolerance because you're tough. You have a low baseline because the seesaw has been sitting on the pain side for too long. Number 3, the abstinence reset. Here is the part that gives the mechanic back to you. The seesaw is adaptive in both directions. If you stop tipping it toward pleasure, the brain adapts again. The compensatory pain response stops firing. The baseline rises, slowly. Over days and weeks, the resting state climbs back toward the neutral it used to be. The pleasures that no longer worked start working again. Things you stopped enjoying start producing real signal. Lemke calls this the dopamine fast. Her clinical practice with patients dealing with everything from social media to alcohol to pornography to high-sugar diets has produced the same finding repeatedly. A 4-week period of complete or near-complete abstinence from the chosen substance or behavior is enough in most cases to substantially restore the baseline. Not always all the way, but enough that the patient can feel something they had stopped being able to feel. The first week is the hardest. The seesaw is still sitting on the pain side with no incoming pleasure to mask it. The patient feels worse, not better. This is the part where most people quit because they assume the misery means abstinence is making things worse. It isn't. The misery is the pain side becoming visible, undisguised, for the first time in months or years. It was always there. It was just being temporarily covered up by the next hit. By week 2, the seesaw begins to settle. By week 3, the baseline starts climbing. By week 4, most patients report a clear, undeniable shift. Their old pleasures, when reintroduced in moderate doses, produce real lift again. The world feels less flat. The dopamine system has, in clinical terms, recalibrated. You don't fix the deficit by chasing more pleasure. You fix it by giving the seesaw a chance to come back to level. Number 4, the identity shift. Here is the part nobody talks about. Understanding the seesaw isn't just a behavior change, it's an identity rewrite. The day you stop seeing yourself as someone with a lack of self-control and start seeing yourself as someone whose dopamine system has been hijacked by a hostile environment, the entire shape of your relationship with your own behavior changes. A self-blamer's question is, why can't I just stop? A mechanic-aware person's question is, what is the seesaw doing right now and why? The first question produces shame, which produces more pain, which produces more reaching for pleasure, which feeds the loop. The second question produces observation, which produces information, which produces the small interventions that actually work. The shift from blame to mechanic is the difference between fighting yourself and operating yourself. Lemke writes about this directly. Her patients almost universally report that the moment they understood the pleasure-pain balance, the shame began to lift. Not because the behavior was excused, because the behavior was finally legible. They were not weak. They were sitting in a deficit state caused by a system doing exactly what it was built to do. Once that was visible, the small actions, the brief abstinence, the boundary on the substance, the swap of one cue for another, became possible in a way they were not when the behavior was being read as a character flaw. That shift from blame to mechanic is uncomfortable sometimes. That discomfort is not a problem. That discomfort is the new identity installing itself. Number 5. Why your brain fights this. If the mechanic is so well documented, why doesn't everyone use it? Because your brain is wired for an environment that no longer exists. For most of human history, pleasure was rare and difficult to obtain. Sweet food was a seasonal accident. Sexual novelty was constrained by tribe size. Social validation came from a few dozen people who knew you. The seesaw evolved in this scarcity, and it worked beautifully there. The compensatory pain response was fine. because the next hit of pleasure was days or weeks away, and the seesaw had time to recover between doses. The modern environment broke that scarcity in a single generation. You now carry in your pocket an unlimited supply of every pleasure your brain was built to chase. Sweet food, on demand. Sexual novelty, infinite. Social validation, constant, from millions. Stimulation, 24 hours a day. The pleasure side of the seesaw is being pushed down all day, every day, with no recovery period at all. The brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. It is just operating in conditions that did not exist when the wiring was set. This is why willpower alone, on a phone you carry everywhere, on a fridge full of engineered food, on a screen that never stops, will lose. The environment is not neutral. The environment is engineered by people whose job it is to keep the seesaw tilted, to keep you in the deficit state and reaching for the next dose. They know exactly what they are doing. Most users have no idea what is being done to them. The fix is not to fight the environment by feel. The fix is to install distance between yourself and the most engineered pleasures, before the seesaw is asked to fight them in real time. Which brings us to the next mechanic. Number 6. Self-binding. Here is the move that makes the mechanic usable. Lemke calls it self-binding. The technique is ancient, but she names it cleanly. You don't try to resist the pleasure in the moment of temptation. You make the pleasure unreachable by your past self before the moment of temptation arrives. The phone gets left in another room. The app gets deleted, not just minimized. The food doesn't enter the house, because resisting it in the kitchen at 11 p.m. is a fight your prefrontal cortex will lose. The drink gets given away, so that having won means leaving the house, and the friction is enough to break the loop. The browser blocker gets installed, with the password kept by someone else. The decision is made once in advance by the version of you that is rested, clear-headed, and not in deficit. The version of you that is in deficit cannot be trusted to make the decision. That version of you will lose almost every time to a system that was engineered to win against it. So you don't ask that version to fight. You make sure that by the time it shows up, the fight is already over. This is not weakness. This is engineering. The same way you don't put a bowl of candy on your desk and rely on willpower to ignore it, you don't keep the most engineered pleasures one tap away and rely on a depleted nervous system to resist them. You move the candy. You move the tap. Most people try to manage temptation by being stronger than it. The skilled remove the temptation entirely, in advance, while the strong version of them is still in charge. Number 7. The recalibrated life. Let's run the timeline. Week 1 of self-binding feels worse, not better. The seesaw is still sitting on the pain side. The pleasure that was masking the deficit is gone, and the deficit is now fully visible. You'll be tempted to give up because misery is what you feel, not relief. Week 2 is when something subtle changes. The misery starts to lift, not because anything got better externally, but because the seesaw is finally tilting back toward neutral. You begin to feel for the first time in a long time calm, not entertained, calm. The two are not the same. Month 1 is when the baseline returns. Old pleasures in moderate doses begin to work again. A walk produces real signal, a meal tastes like food. A conversation lands instead of skimming the surface. The world is not new. Your dopamine system has just recalibrated to it. Month 3 is when the shift becomes structural. You begin to crave less and notice more. The compulsive checks slow down on their own. Boredom returns and turns out to be a feature, not a bug. The deep satisfactions, the ones that build slowly and pay off in years, become accessible again, because the system that processes them is no longer drowned in cheap signal. Year 1 is where most people who maintain this no longer recognize the version of themselves from 12 months ago. Not because they became more disciplined, because their seesaw is no longer pinned to the pain side. They are operating from neutral, and from neutral, almost everything is easier. Decisions, relationships, work, sleep. The baseline is not glamorous. It is just the place from which a real life can be lived. The choice. Here is where you are now. You know about the seesaw. You know about the deficit state. You know why your brain pushes you toward more, even as more makes things worse. You know about self-binding. You know about the timeline. What you do next is the only variable left. Most people will close this video, agree the framework makes sense, and tomorrow morning, they will reach for the same first hit they reached for today. The seesaw will keep doing exactly what it was built to do because seesaws don't care whether you understand them, they just balance. Or you can do something different. Today. Not next week. Today. Pick one pleasure that owns you. Just one. Self-bind it. Put it out of reach for 30 days. And watch what your baseline does when it stops being held down. Once the seesaw levels, the world stops feeling flat. If this video shifted something, leave it a like. Subscribe to Living in Atoms. We break down the mechanics behind the systems running your life, one at a time. And share this with one person who needs to hear it, because the same seesaw is tilted in everyone you know, whether they can see it or not. You don't feel empty because you need more pleasure. You feel empty because the seesaw has been pinned down for too long. The balance is the secret, the reset is the lock, and the door has always been open.